What does it mean to be a resilient mother? Do you feel like you are a resilient mother? Do you gravitate towards stories of resiliency? I know I do. I love stories of resiliency. I love movies or stories, books of someone who has overcome hardship and they are resilient. They are still moving in life. But what does it mean to be a resilient mother? And why is a grief expert talking about this? Well, grief comes in all shapes and sizes, right? The first thing that we think of in grief is the loss of someone. Someone dies, right? And if you're thinking of a resilient mother, you might think of a mother who fought through something and that grief and her losing that battle. For me, resiliency came in grief of losing my children. I've had 3 children die over the course of 20 years, one in an accidental drowning, one after 10 years of medical trauma, and then Maya most recently from sudden unexpected death and epilepsy. And so when I think of a resilient mother, I stand up and say, yes, I am resilient. But what does that mean in other areas of grief? Grief in losing a child is one thing, but there are often times that people talk to me about they've lost a part of their relationship with their adult children, or maybe they lost a part of themselves, grief of self, in raising their children. So grief, we all experience grief, and knowing how to process that grief so that you can be a resilient mother. I used to think that motherhood was innate, right? Especially biological motherhood is innate, and that you have a child and you love that child so much that you would do anything for that child. And that is somewhat true in my life. I have adopted children and biological children, and I poured my love out to them. But I'm not quite sure it was innate. I struggle to be that nurturing mother who wants to play dolls or spend time with children. I provided. No one would ever question whether I provided for my children. And so resiliency for me has to do with the journey. And I'm going to give you 3 traits that I want all of us to just intensify and work on. They're not whether you have it or you don't. It's not a personality trait or a decision. I mean, it's partly a decision to choose to be a resilient mother, but it's not all natural. And there's parts of your past and your life and the things that you're dealing with that impact how you are a mother, how you show up, and how resilient you can be. My name's Christy Bundekumar. I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner, which means I have a degree as a mental health provider. But my real experience comes from my life. I always knew I wanted to be a mother. So in my early 20s, I was searching for that soulmate that I could have a family with. I got married at 25, first child at 26, second child at 27. That was Reggie and Maya. And then my husband was a teacher and a football coach. I was a nurse, and I really believed that we can do this. Let's have a big family. Let's adopt children. And so the first 2 children we adopted, we knew them. One, we knew them from our church. The other one we knew was a student at my husband's school, and they were very appreciative, and the adoption went smoothly and very easily. And then we adopted a 3-child sibling group after that. And, oftentimes I look back and I say, well, should I have done that? And God knew if I would have known that my biological children were going to be sick, I would not have, right? But I didn't know that. And so then now I have these adopted children, and I love these adopted children. And I am a resilient mother. Does that mean I'm a good mother? Am I a nurturing mother? Have I made tons of mistakes? Yes. And so that's what I want to talk about today. What is it? I would rather you be a resilient mother than, quote unquote, a good mother. I remember when I was raising my kids, I would read these parenting books, and these books would tell me this theory on raising children and how to be a good parent. And I was active in the church, and there's, very specific things that the church teaches families and, about parenting. And I had this very black and white thinking of this is what it means to be a good parent. And I think we all get caught up in this, that results equals good parenting, right? So if you look at my results, you might not say I was such a good parent. I've lost 3 children, and the circumstances behind those are not directly my fault, but there is some responsibility there. And, my adult children are not where I thought they would be. And, if you're watching, my adult children, if you're watching, this is not that I'm not proud of you. I am very proud of you. You have been through, in your short life, more than anyone should ever have to go through. They lost their siblings. They lost their father. And they had trauma coming in. So this is not about that. This is, how do I be a resilient mother? And what does that mean to be a resilient mother? I talk about my grief a lot. I don't talk about being a mother very often because it's not the thing that I'm most proud of. I am proud that I don't give up. And that's kind of what we think of when it comes to resiliency. And so there's 3 things that I want you to think about when it comes to being a resilient mother. And that first one is never give up. And my children are adults. My youngest living child is, I think, just turned 30. And so it doesn't stop. It's not till they're 18, right? And, one of them called recently, needed some help financially, and that's okay. There's some limits and boundaries that I have had to put out. So when we say never give up, I often hear people say things about boundaries. And boundaries is such a rigid word, like you need to set this boundary and not cross over it. And I remember this is the parenting books that I read as well when the kids were young. Oh, you have to do this. You have to be consistent 100% of the time, or they're just going to run right over you. That's a boundary. And if you're in the midst of raising your kids right now, you know how hard it is to be 100% consistent with those boundaries. I was talking to another professional recently, interviewing them, and we were talking about boundaries. And she shifted my mindset for me. She said, think of it as limits, not boundaries. So for example, I have had to set limits with my children, right? My adult children. And I am not raising their children. I am not letting them move back into the home to live for free. These were like hard boundaries, right? But then to say I'm not going to help you at all, or, cut someone off, those are hard boundaries that I discourage. And this is vice versa as well. If you are struggling with your relationship with your parent, because they, something that they did to you, creating a strong boundary of no contact might not be what's best for you. And everybody's story is different. Please, this is not telling someone to stay in abusive relationship. But I often see young people who are my children's age, my adult children's age, cutting their parents off and saying, they did this, this, and this. I am no longer speaking to them. Or maybe you're in a situation where your adult child is taking advantage of you and you feel like you need to set a boundary. Shift that mentality to a limit. So for example, I have a child who right now I'm not super proud of the decisions that they're making, and I don't want to encourage some of the things that they're doing, right? And so sometimes I just can't do it that day. Like I can't talk and be nice and be loving and nurturing, and so I don't answer the phone. It's not that I'm never going to talk to her. It's just a limit today. I don't have the mental bandwidth to do it today. That's the difference between having a limit versus a boundary. right? It's a limit. It's what I can do today in my commitment to never give up. Never give up on being a mother. And I have struggled in these last couple months because, or a couple years since losing Maya in 2021, like that was the worst for me. And then to feel unappreciated by my adult children. Again, children, if you're watching, it's not personal. This is just being real with how I feel. Making sure that I don't give up on my relationship with them, myself, and on them, right? And this can be very tough. So we're talking about being a resilient mother in the context of grief. Sometimes we have to grieve relationships are not what we wanted them to be. Sometimes we have to grieve ourselves that we were not as good as we wanted to be. I mean, ask any of my adult children. I was not the best mom. I made decisions that were not the best for them. And this is public knowledge, and I can share this, is one of the things, two of my adopted daughters really rebelled aggressively in their teen years, running away, doing things that every mother's worst nightmare. And I say my adopted children to clarify because they came to me when they were 7 and 8 years old, and they came to me with trauma, and they came to me with significant attachment issues, right? No one had ever loved them unconditionally. And then when they were in that rebellious state, I was dealing with the medical trauma of Reggie, and I sent them away to a program. Now, did they need to go away? Did there needed to be an aggressive intervention? Yes. Should I have found one that was closer? Yes. Because I realize now, retrospectively, that decision just intensified their attachment issues. So a pretty big mistake that I made in the midst of raising my children. But they've forgiven me, but you do have to be vulnerable as a mother, especially as they start getting older and are able to, have some empathy for you as a mother and the decisions that you've made. But I've asked for their forgiveness for that very specifically. And I believe they've forgiven me and we've worked through that. But this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about never giving up. There's vulnerability there. It's not just pushing through. And it's not always a happy ending. We love these movies that, have a resilient mother fighting something. Their child is sick. I remember this. I don't remember the name of the movie, but this child was sick with this rare disease, and the father would do anything to find a cure. And in the end, he found a cure. Resiliency, though, is being able to continue to be resilient when there is not a happy ending, when horrible things happen. Being able to be resilient for myself, like I know I'm resilient. I can confess that maybe I wasn't a good mom, but I was definitely a resilient mom. And so here are the things. Never give up, right? But that doesn't mean just blindly continuing to let children do whatever they want. I mean, it comes with boundaries and limits. But don't give up on being a mother, being a resilient mother. Learn from your mistakes is number 2. What does that mean? I can't take back the mistakes that I made with the kids, right? But I can ask for forgiveness. I can learn from those mistakes. I can talk to my adult children now about how that impacted their attachment issues. I got wiser from my mistakes, and I'm able to share that and communicate that. But also in the midst of it, learning from your mistakes and adjusting. I think I was way too rigid, and my kids say I was strict, but it was a rigid mindset of like, if I just keep being strict, I will have done the right thing. And if they make bad choices, it's on them. And it's a two-way, and I didn't learn fast enough from my mistakes. And I think this happens a lot in generations. And this is why we talk about being a grandma is much easier, right? Because I've learned the mistakes. I can say to my daughter, we had everybody over the other day for a birthday party, and one of my grandchildren was doing things that was a little, maybe not perfect. And her mom was just like kind of on her. And as grandma, I was able to say, it's not a big deal. Let it go. And so unfortunately, sometimes we don't learn until we're grandma or when it's kind of too late. But it's never too late, right? Number one is never giving up. So we go back and we teach our children these lessons that we learned. Don't do it exactly the way I did it. Let's talk about, if you're having a conversation with your adult child, let's talk about the things I did right and the things that hurt your feelings or that you think were wrong. And let's talk about them. Let's have that open dialogue so that we can break those generational things that continue to happen, right? So number 2 is learning from your mistakes as quickly as possible. And, I wish I would have known my younger self. If I were to go back and could tell my younger self 2 things. The first one, never giving up, I knew that was going to be me. The second is to learn from my mistakes quickly. And this third one is that relationships trump everything. Your relationship with your child trumps everything. It should be a priority. If you have a relationship with your child, when you make mistakes, we will all learn from them and it won't impact the long-term relationship. Are the results going to be exactly what you want? No. Your child is on their own journey. And that is something that is often really, really, really hard to be okay with. I remember when I was teaching a class on raising mentally strong kids and a licensed clinical social worker, we were having this kind of discussion back and forth. And I said, I think of this relationship of, with my kids like a tug of war. Pull and then they pull and she said, no, it doesn't have to be a tug of war. It could be a dance and you're leading and they're fumbling and they're stepping on your toes. They're doing things that hurt you, but you stay calm and present and be that guide for them. I didn't learn that soon enough. Like I said, my children are all grown and gone. But I do know that relationships are a priority. So the 3 things, again, that I would say resiliency. And resiliency is not being good, right? It's about learning through the process regardless of what happens. If you often think about resiliency when it comes to trauma or, a soldier who has gone to war, right? Oh, they're resilient. They've gone to war and they've come back and they're living life. They've gone through these horrible things and they're living life. They didn't do it all perfect and it's hard, right? So the same is true in resiliency of parenting. Never give up on your child. Learn from your mistakes as quickly as possible and make sure that you focus on your relationship. Take time to actually grieve those things as they're coming. Grieve where you've made mistakes, where you have hampered the relationship. Grieve where you've made mistakes. Grieve yourself and stay on the journey of being resilient. Now I'm going to go into some questions. The first question is, I feel like I was a resilient mother, but the kids didn't know what I was resilient against. I have been a victim of pretty significant trauma in the household, and the kids did not know. Now my kids are adult. My kids are adults, and our relationship is strained. What can I do? I think this happens a lot more than we talk about. And my mom talks about this in the grief documentary. Like, you don't share your hardships with your children. You're trying to protect your children. And so they don't see how much energy you're having to use to be resilient to something that's going on. I'm assuming you said they're adult children now. And, making that effort to be vulnerable, even without giving details. I don't give details to my kids. But I often say to them, I was so afraid of losing Reggie and kind of mad at you for rebelling while Reggie was sick, that I didn't give you what you need. Starting the conversation with vulnerability as much as you can. Ask for forgiveness if there's specific things, or ask them, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? And, maybe you need time to process what they say you did wrong and take that time to process. But where you can apologize, it's time to start apologizing and asking for forgiveness, because just because we're the parent and we have the authority, it doesn't mean we did it right. And sometimes, it's apologizing for how it was perceived and then sharing your intent. I get a lot of parents that it goes both ways, that the adult relationship with their child is strained, and they kind of feel like the child is toxic for them, and maybe the adult child is saying that the mother is toxic. We're living in a culture where people just want to cut off what hurts. We don't want to feel pain. We don't want to process and grow. Growth and change is hard. But if it's possible, I think you should try. I think you would feel better trying. All right. The next question is, if mothering and nurturing don't come natural, innate for me, like I have to choose to do these things, how do I balance self-care versus mothering? Whew. I think mothers in general tend toward making all decisions for their children, and we laugh at the airplane thing that says, well, put on your oxygen mask before you put on your child. We laugh at that because we never do it in real life, but you should. And we should feel okay taking care of ourselves first. But I have a whole video series on, do you know how to take care of yourself? What does that mean? What is self-care? So I would definitely go and watch that. What is self-care? Because if you don't know who you are, you don't know how to take care of yourself. If you don't know what fills your cup, you just keep giving from an empty cup. And so we as mothers, resilient mothers, should know how to fill our cup. Do you know how to fill your cup? Go ahead and watch. I have a whole series. I call it the 5 Selves. And it starts with the general series and then goes into how do you take care of yourself? How do you process these things outside of your body? How do you get through? When we say resiliency, it's a movement. It's not a rigid, I can do it, right? Resiliency is moving through. So take care of yourself. Be a resilient mother.